Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Good night, everybody. I have no idea what time you're listening to the podcast, but it is Wednesday and we are between two Sundays. And this is Mark Gladman, and this other person or voice you're about to hear is Mark Beresford.
Mark Beresford, good to see you.
I'm glad you spoke there because I was thinking about our podcast listeners not seeing you wave.
Yeah, of course I would. Yes.
Easy for the YouTube watchers. And by the way, if you are listening on the podcast and you'd prefer to see our ugly mugs, then we do also throw Between Two Sundays up on YouTube as well, where you can watch us as well as listen to us. And I don't know if it's any more entertaining, but
who knows?
Maybe so. Maybe so. It is Wednesday and Ash Wednesday as we kick off Lent. And so today marks the start of the Lenten season, 40 days of, I guess, penance, repentance, reflection. It's a very powerful, I don't know for you, mate, but it's a very powerful season. I think observing Lent in some way has certainly sharpened the Holy Week and Easter weekend for me. It's certainly made it special, especially Holy Saturday, which is one of my favorite days of the year.
That's interesting, Mark, isn't it? Lent, Ash Wednesday leading into Lent is all of those things. But for me, ultimately, it's preparing ourselves to hear again the story of Jesus' death and resurrection. And such a wonderful thing that the church for such a long time has said, we hear this story over and over again. We probably get a little bit too used to it. Once a year, we're going to take 40 days where we consciously prepare to hear again the story of Jesus' death and resurrection. And it reminds me, again, just how staggeringly radical it is that God would come and die, that God would come and suffer. This is the very last thing we would expect. And yet, as Christians, we kind of get very used to this.
This is, and we shouldn't. We shouldn't.
That's right. That's right. So even in the church I run, which is a very loose kind of tradition, so a Baptist church, we don't do Lent as such. But I always put something in, probably as a result of my time in the Anglican church. I always put something in, and I'm over and over again, I'm saying, we need to prepare for Easter, because this story is so upside down that it is just a shame if you get used to it and start to think this is normal, because it is designed to be shocking. And I think that's why Lent is important. Lent is, whatever you do with it, Lent needs to, if it's to do its work, it needs to prepare you to hear again the extraordinary story of the behaviour of God in the person of Jesus.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing to just arrive at Holy Week, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and suddenly jump into the story, but to have this season that, and when we say prepare, we're not just saying, I'm getting ready. We're also saying we're putting ourselves into, I was going to say a state, but it sounds like we're drumming something up, but we're not. We're putting ourselves in a position where we're ready to hear it. And I don't mean that by, prepared, but that we're going to hear it well. We're going to hear it as it should be heard. And I mean, I don't know, we'll talk about these readings around Holy Week and stuff as we get closer, but one of the things that I'm reminded of all the time when we read the Holy Week stories is that the people who were a part of those stories had no idea about what was going to happen. We've got the benefit of hindsight, but nobody there did. And so this idea of preparing ourselves for Lent, preparing to hear, it's almost like putting ourselves in a position so that we don't miss anything, that they don't just run over our heads. Like you're saying, we hear them so
Yeah.
often.
Yeah.
So however you're spending Lent, friends, may
Mm.
the peace of God be with you, and open your eyes
Yeah.
to what it is that God wants to say to you through this season this year.
Yeah.
So last week we had the Transfiguration.
Mm.
And I got to tell you, man, we had such a good conversation last week, and there was so much in it. But the thing that stuck for me, and this was really interesting, it wasn't the thing that I expected, but I found myself really reflecting on, you said at one point, Moses went up the mountain from the Exodus reading. And then when he came down, he veiled his face so that people could actually bear to be around him. It made me think about, because remember later on I talked about how, Peter, James and John went up, and on the way back down, Jesus said, "Now don't tell anybody what you've just seen."
Yep.
And I sort of understood that as, people have to experience it for themselves. And I still think that's true. But it's interesting in thinking about adding what you were saying about Moses there. I thought about how often do we experience something in our spiritual journey, in our walk with God, in our, we have this revelation or epiphany of sorts, and we suddenly just want to tell every Tom, Dick and Harry, and we can't stop talking about it, and we don't want to talk about anything else. And how many people are put off by that? How many people are, oh, come on, man, just put that aside. And the veil just reminded me of that whole idea of not being a pain in the backside to someone because I've experienced something they haven't. That the veil was not literally, Moses was glowing and people were a bit afraid of it, so he put the veil over his head. But that perhaps I need to be, if when I experience those times, I need to be a little bit more aware, self-aware, and aware of the people around me, and not fly off on these, tangents of telling everybody they've got to read this book or do this thing or try this whatever or watch this film, or because it's going to totally change and transform your life. I mean, certainly make those recommendations, but not roll on them so much that people just go, I can't stand to be around this person. Because that's just putting people off. Yeah. And so this idea that when we experience these things, perhaps when Jesus was saying, just don't tell anyone about it, it was because the first thing Peter particularly was going to do was race down and say, hey, everybody, guess what I just saw? Guess what we just saw? You should get into them. And that would have just made everybody go, come on, no. And not even about what they saw, but just the attitude and stuff that can come through. So for me, that was a really important takeaway, just to be self-aware of, have these experiences, sure, enjoy these experiences, but don't allow them to overwhelm others. Hold on to them, sure.
I really like that. Yeah, I really like what you're saying there, Mark. And there's something, there's something inherent about an experience that is beyond explanation. So if you have a profound experience of God or the Spirit, I think there's probably a reason you've experienced that rather than God's explained it to you. And maybe the same grace needs to be handed on to others as well. I think experience is, this is just the type of thing that speaks to the heart and to the imagination and often goes far beyond words. Maybe if that message to you has had to be delivered in such a way that's beyond words, maybe you need to say it's probably beyond my capability to explain.
Yeah. Just before we came on, we were talking about the Tao Te Ching.
We were, yes.
The very first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. Nameless, the beginning of heaven and earth. Being empty, see the wonder. Being present, see the appearance. This is mystery, mystery upon mystery, the doorway to wonder. Maybe we have this attempt in our humanity to try and have to explain everything, to try and have to put words around everything. Yeah. And sometimes you just can't, or even beyond, sometimes you just shouldn't.
Yes.
Let it be what it is. Yeah. Yeah. Did you have anything else that jumped out at you from over the last few days? You've been
I've as I mentioned before the show, in our little discussion, I've been reading a little bit about the Celtic spirituality, Celtic Christianity, through a wonderful book, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul.
Yeah, John Philip
Newell. Wonderful read, although I actually listened to it on Audible, which was a terrific experience as well.
Which, having read it, I'm now going to download it. You remind me that I need to do that.
Yeah. What struck me was the consistency, I think, through a number of his chapters, actually, that spoke about essentially the light of life, seeing this in creation, seeing this in other people, seeing this in a newborn child, seeing this in the beauty of and magnificence of a tree or a forest or a scene, seeing light in the magnificence of God. And I've been holding these two passages, this story of Moses, who seems to, I've always thought of the veil as kind of over his face and his head. And then there's this story of Jesus in the New Testament where, I mean, Moses' story is kind of dramatic enough.
Yeah.
But Jesus not only does his face glow, but his clothes turn white. And I think I've always thought of this as a characteristic of the clothes. But what if it's all of Jesus glowing, and that's just coming through the clothes, and that's whiter than anyone can bleach? What if this is Moses on a bigger scale? What if there's kind of a connection between what's happened to Moses and what's happened to Jesus, but this is all of Jesus' body alight, so to speak. All of Jesus' body glowing in the essence of God. So I've been thinking about that and asking and praying, actually, what does it look like for me to see the light of God in everything? And even going through, I went on a walk last night, bit of a hike after it was dark, thinking, and it was a beautiful night, mist, rain, it was dark, it was cool, it was beautiful. That doesn't sound beautiful if you think it's only beautiful when the sun's out or the stars are out, but no. It was spectacular. It was absolutely spectacular. And I was walking thinking, I love that I can see the beauty around me, but what am I missing? What am I not seeing? What is veiled because of something in me, or what is veiled because for whatever reason? What would it be like to see with the eyes of God, and see the light in everything? So I've been sort of thinking around that, asking what the implications are. I think there are moments where I see something special in someone else, and I wonder if that almost could be called light, maybe where there's a connection with someone else or something like that.
That's so good.
So I've been playing with that idea. That light is a very dominant theme in Celtic Christianity. And so I've been holding those two together after reading the Transfiguration and then hearing this text by Newell this week.
You probably won't be surprised to know either that I just checked to download the audiobook on Audible, and it's already in my library. So I've read the Kindle version. I haven't listened to it yet.
Probably says more about how long I took to explain all that than anything else.
Oh, no, it didn't take very long. It was like, buy the book. Oh, you've got it already. Oh, okay. Sorry. But whether you read it or I'm looking forward to listening to it as well. But I read it, and it's just so Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul by John Philip Newell. Do that. I might even stick a link in the show notes, and you can grab that and have a look.
I am
well worth
very
it.
tempted. I'm very tempted to do a book review on it on Barefoot Follower.
Yeah, do that, mate. That'd be
So
good.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know if that goes up, and you can throw the link out to that.
Done. All right, so we are officially starting Lent today, being Ash Wednesday. And so this weekend, we have our readings for the first Sunday in Lent. So we've got Deuteronomy 26, verses 1 to 11, Psalm 91, verse 1 to 2, and then 9 to 16, one of my favorites from Compline, of course. Romans 10, verse 8b to 13, and then Luke chapter 4, verses 1 to 13. So that's where we are headed this week. What is it that jumped out for you, mate? Where did you want to begin today?
Well, I think the gospel reading is there's a lot to play with there, a lot to be said about Jesus facing temptation. Of course, this is where we actually get Lent from, the season of Lent, from this story of Jesus taking 40 days, led by the Spirit, importantly, and profoundly influenced by the devil's temptations, this coming and going of the devil, combating often with Scripture, but clearly with a deep, deep knowledge of the call of God on his life. I'm always struck when I read this by how genuinely tempting I believe these things would be for Jesus. 40 days of no food. Jesus is fully human. That is a long time. It feels like something of an understatement to say after those 40 days he was hungry. I think this is a very real temptation for Jesus to do something good in the wrong way, or under the instruction of one who is not good. So I don't think Jesus' desire for food is bad, but I think he's being tempted to fulfill that good desire in a way that will actually have him listening to the wrong voices. In the same way, the devil takes him to a place where he can see all the glory of the world. This is the Jesus coming to save the world. I think this is a very real temptation for Jesus. And this throwing himself off the pinnacle of the temple, the angels revealed who catch him at the bottom. This is the Jesus who goes on to do many miracles that surprise many people and create many questions. So it seems to me that these temptations look really close to the things that are on Jesus' heart.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I think that's an element of temptation. And here we see Jesus saying, no, I won't do good in this way. I will do good in God's way. And I think that's particularly pertinent nowadays. I think we can justify almost anything by saying, well, I intended for good to come out of it. And clearly Jesus wouldn't have any other temptation, any other motivation for this, I think.
Yeah.
But this is, Jesus goes on and does a lot of these things. He feeds 5,000 with bread, bread made from bread, which I think is just wonderful, so earthy, really. Just fantastic. Jesus goes on and does a lot of these things, but he does it in the humility of one who sits at the feet of God, who responds to the words of God and the call of God, rather than the one who is doing things that are simply spectacular.
Yeah.
But I really like this. There's a certain humility, and I think it does prepare Jesus for the ministry he's about to undertake.
Yeah. It's a pretty intense story, and as you say, it sets up I guess the framework for what it is, or the reason why we come to Lent. You know, that time of preparation for whatever is to come. And for Jesus, that was, you know, preparing to enter into the ministry that he entered into. And I suppose there was a sense of putting himself, well, maybe not putting himself, but working on the idea that his place is in God, that there's parameters within which Jesus will be working, that I'm not going to go out and make bread for myself. I'm actually going to be making bread for others. And while I'll share in that bread, I'm not going to do it just out of selfish impulse. And same with the other two, you know, the throw yourself down and have all this. Jesus is basically saying it's not about me. It's not about me being fed. It's not about me being worshipped. It's not about me having everything. It's about freeing others to encounter God so that they can be fed, so that they can have that interaction with God directly, and so that they can realize that the world and everything in it is a part of the gift that God has given us to live in and connect with. Comes back to that connection to the earth that we've been talking about before. It was interesting too, though, that there's this link between these four readings that popped up for me, which comes back to, you know, that focus on what Jesus does. So in the Deuteronomy story, this is God speaking, the Deuteronomy reading, this is God speaking to the people, and it kicks off with verse 1, where it says, when you have come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess it, and you possess it, you settle in it, you shall take some of the first fruits of your ground, and you will basically give thanks. And so here is this place that God has brought you to, and your response for God bringing you to that place is to give thanks, to be grateful, and to hold this sense of gratitude in your heart for it. And then at the very end, in verse 11, and then you, together with the priests, the Levites, and the aliens who reside among you. So everybody, so the priests, the people, and even those who don't technically belong, everyone will celebrate with the gifts that God has given you from the ground. So bring your first fruits and have a party is basically what it is.
That is exactly what is going on.
Bring your first fruits together and have a party.
I was really struck in this passage, Mark, by the lack of measurements. I was really struck by this. So often we think, I'll give 10% or something like that. That's often the Old Testament guide that's called the tithe. There's nothing like that here. Look at what it just says. Look at what the ground has produced. Pick some of it. Pick a basket. So you can imagine how many different sized baskets there are in the average Jewish household. Pick a basket, fill it with some of the stuff that you've grown, and bring it along. And I reckon there's something beautiful about this, and it has echoes of the New Testament, which talks less about the giving of tithe or 10%, much more about generosity and making sure you assess what you feel you can afford, and you give out of the generosity of your heart. So it's not a mathematical calculation. It's actually a gratitude calculation. This has all the echoes of that.
Absolutely.
I reckon, can you imagine, they're about to set off to the temple or wherever this takes place. And, as a family, they've got to kind of look around at what's happened this year. They've got to remember back to everything that's been produced. And basically, they've got to just pick some. Which basket will we pick this year? Do we need to make a bigger basket because we're that much more? And the result of their generosity is the only real result of it is a bigger party.
Yes.
So the more generous they are, the more they have to feast on.
And this is the thing that really struck home for me, is that, they bring it to the temple, and we always have this idea that, you bring it to the temple and the priest just take it. No, in this one, then you're going to sit down, bring your first fruits, and then you, together with the priest and with anybody who's not necessarily of your family, but anybody who's here, the alien who resides among you, everyone's invited to celebrate with all the bounty, which includes that God has given you.
Yes.
So there's this huge party of gratitude.
Beautiful. Just wonderful.
And so hold that under your hat. Then you move to the Psalm, which, as I mentioned, is probably one of my favorite Psalms. And it's only my favorite Psalm probably because my favorite office is Compline. And of course, Psalm 91 features traditionally 3 Psalms, sometimes 4, that are always played at Compline, and this is one of them. But then when you read it with the echoes of the Deuteronomy reading in the back of your head, what you're literally reading here is a psalm of thanksgiving. And it's also a psalm. So the very end of the Deuteronomy reading, together with the Levites and the aliens among you, you shall celebrate all the bounty that God has given you and to your household. And they're celebrating because they have come to the land that God has given them. They've come home. They've come into this place which God has created for them to be in. And in the beginning of the psalm, you who live in the shelter of the Most High, abide in the shadow of the Almighty, I will say, the Lord, my refuge, my fortress, my God in whom I trust. God has provided this safe place, this place of being, this place of home, this place of connection, this place of belonging. And it's in that space and place that the people of Deuteronomy were told, bring your first fruits and celebrate together that you're in this place. And likewise, while the psalm focuses more on being in that place and being a place of protection, there's a sense of gratitude and thanksgiving in this psalm that God has provided this place where I can shelter under God's wings, where I can find refuge and help and rest in those times. And so you've got this thanksgiving theme that goes through. So if you roll into the New Testament reading in Romans, you see this echoed again. Now, it gets really interesting here. In verse 9, Romans 10:9, because if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Now, this is, with all love, one of those verses that I call a clobber verse, that the church for years has used to beat people into submission of, well, you don't belong unless you do this. But when you really read into what the verse is saying, it's got nothing to do with making some sort of mathematical calculated call on anything so that you have this, this is the secret password in order to belong. It's not like that at all. If we look in the Greek, the word for salvation here isn't just about getting saved and going to heaven. It's literally got nothing to do with that. It has to do with being made whole. It's got to do with healing. It's got to do with being called into this place. And if you look carefully at the wording of the verse, that if you confess, in the Greek, it literally reads that if you confess the saying with the mouth of you, Lord Jesus. It literally simply says, Rima ento somati, sorry about my pronunciation, suhoti kyrion Yesuon. There's no confess that Jesus Christ is Lord or confess that he is Lord. It's just confess the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart.
Trust yourself.
Yeah. And so there's this sense again of what does it mean to believe in Jesus? Well, what did Jesus talk about? Jesus talked about all those things that we talked about before, that in the ministry of Jesus, it's not about feeding me, it's about everybody being fed. It's not about me being rescued, it's about everybody having connection to God. It's not about me being worshipped, it's about everybody having that access to God. And so when you have a look at what Paul is saying here on a deeper level, he's literally asking the Roman church to realize that, and if you go down a little bit further, and this is where it can occur, there's no distinction between Jew and Greek. It's the same Lord of all. He's generous to all who call on them. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord be saved. And even the verse before that, verse 11, the scripture says, no one who believes in him will be put to shame. And if you have a look into the commentaries, you'll see that what Paul is quoting there is Isaiah, I think it's 29, where Isaiah talks about the cornerstone. And if you put your trust in the cornerstone, you'll never be, you won't be put to shame. You won't have reason to be put to shame for putting your trust there. And so this is not about confessing something in order to belong into some special group. This is about putting your trust in what Jesus has said and realizing that if you trust what Jesus has taught and put it into practice in the way that you live, then you will have nothing to be ashamed about. And again, when you get to the core of what Jesus talks about through his ministry, it's not how to get to heaven and not how to be saved from hell. It's about feed the hungry, look after the widows, look after the orphans, care for those who are on the fringes of society, love one another as I have loved you, love your neighbor as yourself, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Don't respond, and getting down to Easter and what Easter's about. It's not responding by hitting back. That's not the response. The response is love, and love is a much more powerful response. So there's this sense again of this gratitude and thanks that we can belong into this and be accepted simply by entering into this way of living, which is the kingdom of God itself. And so you've got this, and then of course you get to the Luke 4 readings, where we find there's this gratitude which stops us from succumbing to temptation. In each of these points, if you look at them carefully, if you're the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread. And Jesus says, well, we don't live on bread alone. So there's this sense of gratitude for what God provides. And maybe there's no provision right now, but I will be grateful for what God has given me. Later on, if you'll get glory and authority, if you bow down and worship me, well, I don't need that. I'm grateful for the fact that God knows who I am. I don't need everybody else to give me accolades and all this other stuff. I'm grateful that I have a place in God. And then, finally, throw yourself down. Oh, don't put it there. Throw yourself down and, the angels will come and bear you up and whatever else. So, well, I'm not going to put God to the test. And it's being grateful for the fact that God is our protection and our strength. So there's this beautiful sense of gratitude that runs through all these 4 readings. And it was incredibly powerful to see that, because it's easy to go into Lent, particularly, one of the traditions of Lent for many people is to give something up and to put it aside for the 40 days. And sometimes that can seem like a, really rough thing to do. But one of the things that, some people will say, well, you do that so that you can focus on God better. So, I'll give up TV for 40 days so I can pray, or I'll give up lunch so I've got the time to pray, or whatever else, or focus on God or study or read. But I think there's something way more to it than that. When you give something up, you start to see what it is you do have that you're distracted from seeing because of that thing. So when you're not drinking alcohol for 40 days, if you say, I'm going to give up alcohol, give up chocolate, or even give up a meal, or whatever it happens to be for you, give up sleep, I don't know. But when you're in that place and space, it's not just so much focusing on what I don't have. It's saying, well, what do I have? What is here? I mean, I don't have this TV distraction now, but I sit here without my TV on. I see I'm in this home.
Yeah.
I see I've got shelter.
Yeah.
I also notice that there are people who don't have that. And that's where Lent moves us into that response as well. So Lent isn't just about, self-flagellation. And I don't even think it's that if you do it properly and well. If you're self-flagellating yourself, God's not impressed by that at all. But it also moves us into a place where Lent gives us a chance to respond to the things that we're learning and seeing about who we are and where we're at. I have this roof over my head in this home that I can live in. But I also recognize there are people who don't. And so the gratitude isn't just about sitting back and going, God's blessed me. It's about then saying, take your first fruits, the things that you've been blessed with, and now go share them with everyone. Have a party. I don't know. I'm just thinking maybe getting closer to Easter, maybe that's what I need to do. I need to get some people together and say, let's have a party and let's invite the people. Let's invite everyone.
Yeah.
Just put a party.
There's something. There's a lot to think about there. I wonder if there's another theme running through these, and that's confession. The power of our words. Even in that Deuteronomy reading, I was struck by this 3 or 4 sentence speech that's kind of required when they turn up. I imagined, maybe my imagination's just out of control, but I imagined, the average farmer who doesn't give public speeches very often, might only meet a priest once a year, sort of nervously practicing this speech over and over again as they travel towards this place, not wanting to get it wrong. But what if that practice becomes something of a meditation on all that God has given, all that God has done, all the surprising things God has done? What if, as they walk and learn this, there's something in them that says, actually, this is true. God has been this generous. God has been this good to us.
For those who are wondering, let me read it very quickly, Mark, before you go on. So it starts in verse 5, and it says, "A wandering Armenian was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien, few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor on us, we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors. The Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power and with signs and wonders, and brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now I bring the first fruit of the ground that you, O Lord, have given me."
It's not impossible.
Beautiful.
It's not impossible to memorize that much, but it's not automatic either.
No, that's right.
That's something your average person, especially someone who's not the priest who's up preaching every week, probably has to put a little bit of time into. And there's just little elements like that in this reading that make me think, what comes out of our mouths are important. Jesus speaks back to the devil in Luke chapter 4 there. The psalm is asking us to say something. And of course, Romans is asking for this confession as well.
Yes.
I wonder if there's something deep in there. I mean, you look deeper. God creates the universe by saying, "Let it be," by speech, by this revealing of what is in God's heart. Jesus comes into the world described by John as the Word. Clearly, one of the characteristics of Jesus' ministry was not just healing and all the miracles and stuff, but it was speaking and teaching as well. It was pointing to, confessing God, pointing to God in all of those parables and, you know, the sermons and all of those kind of things.
Yeah.
I think there's something here that's insisting that the things that come out of our mouths are creative.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all I want to say on that. Actually, that's interesting that they're creative, and maybe we need to be a little bit more careful. We think of words as being very shallow, but in these 4 readings, they are deeply, deeply creative, with all the echoes, I would suggest, of the creativity of God at the beginning of creation.
It's interesting that in almost every cultural tradition and religion, silence is honoured. Not silence for the purpose of just being silent, but silent to be of few words. And as you were talking just then, that sort of rung for me that, you know, we need to be careful about what we say, and if our words matter, and if our words are a creative force and mean something, then perhaps silence, in order to create space so that what we do say matters, and that we think about what we're going to say, knowing that once it comes out of our mouth, we cannot take it back. And again, that has echoes to what Lent's all about as well. Space for thinking, space for being considerate.
Yes.
Sometimes I wish actually that I wasn't in the day job I'm in where I have to talk. Otherwise, I'd probably do a 40-day silence for Lent. And maybe someday I will. But there's something incredibly powerful about that thought, mate. That's really good.
Mark, there's something else I wanted to bring up about Lent as well, because you are absolutely right in pointing out that many of us give something up for Lent, but there's also a tradition of taking something on, taking something up, which I think is kind of helpful in destruction, constructive. You know, these might be disciplines or some kind of something that helps us turn to God. So less a giving up, more of a taking up of some kind of discipline. So I wonder if that kind of helps or gives options for people, more, you know, a broader range of options for people as to how to respond to Lent. Maybe that, you know, you say, I'm going to take up 10 minutes of prayer in the morning, or I'm going to take up inviting people over to my house on Friday nights of
hospitality
and partying. I'm going to take up something that I feel maybe lacking, or maybe I need to work on in my life, that will prepare me to hear the story of Easter again.
Yeah, that's important.
And
so I apologize for leaving
story,
that out.
No, not at all. But to allow this story of the kingdom of God to penetrate more deeply, and maybe having people over to your house on Friday night for a big party every week of Lent, every Friday night of Lent, that could be a radical discipline that helps you hear the hospitality of God in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus on a new level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And quite often it's the absence of something that creates the space for that thing to be taken up. So, you know, think about, for those of you who are going, oh, how does that work? Well, you could do them hand in hand. So I'm going to give up watching a movie on Netflix every Friday night. Instead, I'm going to open up my home and
that's
get
right.
involved in radical hospitality. So sometimes those things can go together
Yeah.
too. But yeah, certainly taking something up in prayer, and of course the giving of alms. So it's no surprise that in Deuteronomy you got this story of bringing the first fruits, but interestingly celebrating with them, and I think that's important. So it's not a case of just throwing money at a charity. It might be literally taking some money across the street or down to the pizza place, buying 15 pizzas and finding a group of homeless people sitting around at the car park and saying, "Hey, I bought dinner. Come and eat dinner with me. Let's have a party."
That's right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Love it.
Lent begins.
Yeah.
So good. So there you go. That is, unless you got something else, mate. Sorry.
No, I think we've done pretty well, actually.
I think we've done all right. And as always, we invite you to engage with our other resources, the devotionals that go up on our Instagram page, which is @between2Sundays. That's a number 2. You'll also find in the show notes links to to the Barefoot Follower blog that Mark keeps, where you'll find lectionary studies for each of the weeks of the Sundays through the lectionary, and you'll find those articles there. And we invite you to utilize those. And in the next little bit, we're hoping there'll be a few other things coming soon too, as we expand on this work. And please be praying for us. We're praying about, we both sense that there's some sort of expansion happening with this work, and we're not exactly sure what it looks like just yet, but we're just praying and waiting to see what God begins to organically stir up around us. And we've got some ideas, but your prayers for us as we do that, and we'll let you know where some of those things are as we delve into them. But certainly please also engage with us, the DMs on Instagram, comments on Instagram, comments at the blog, and comments on the YouTube posts. We really do want to hear what you have to say, and appreciate those people who have been sending messages, and particularly those who've been saying, "Hey, we really appreciate what you do." We've said it a few times, and I'll say it again. We'd do this if it was just to hang out together once a week, which we haven't done. We've been talking about it for years. It has never sort of come together, and now we've got a good reason. But if this was all it was for, that's great. But that so many of you are finding some value and ever enjoying these conversations. Thank you so much, and please do join the conversation in the different and various ways that we have been able to there. Mate, we are done. We are into Lent, and we're on our way. So bless you folks as you enter into Lent, and perhaps let us know what it is that you might be observing for Lent and how you intend to observe the Lenten season if you go that way. All right, mate, we're done. Bless you. Have a great day.
Good to see you. Great
you too, mate. See you, folks. See you next week for another Between Two Sundays. Bye for now.
Bye.